listening to the Paranormal Patio Podcast with Jason and John. Pull up a chair.
Hey, welcome back to the Paranormal Patio Podcast. As always, I'm Jason.
I'm John.
John, how you doing, man?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm well. It's a little chilly tonight, so this is actually the Paranormal Garage Podcast.
I like the sound of that.
Well, it's an improvisation. I had to do it.
Oh, okay.
For my own health and well-being. So, I made a little oopsie on the first episode, and I had promised I would do some shout-outs to some people who liked one of our posts on our Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to do that right now just so I can fulfill my obligations, because it is a contractual obligation. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, but I learn something every day, so now I know, yes.
Facebook is definitely a contractual obligation. So, without further ado, shout-outs to Michael, Calme, Christopher, Mark, Jeremy, another Michael, Linda, Jerry, JD, Timothy, Jesus, Bob, Bill, Philip, Willie, Jim, David, Billy, and Shane. Thank you guys for your support on Facebook, and hopefully the next time we do this, we'll have a list twice as long. Some good people.
Yes.
So, tonight, we're talking about the Mothman. The Point Pleasant, West Virginia flap or collection of high strangeness that happened in 1966 to 1967 on my end. And I understand you've got some more up-to-date information on the whereabouts of the old Mothman, John.
Yes, actually very updated and within a few hundred miles from where we're at.
I can't wait to hear that. I'm pretty stoked.
Right.
I've been fascinated with the Mothman for a long time. Several years, probably, probably actually about 20 years at this point. A lot of my life. But it's always been around the original Point Pleasant case. And, not to say that I'm not interested in what's going on beyond that, but that's been the scope of my passion for the Mothman.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, I know there are more cases and more sightings and still people investigating. So I'm looking forward to what you've come up with.
Well, it's some pretty interesting things, and there's a kind of a really odd connection with this one. So we'll get into it.
I can't wait. Well, we'll start off. This is something for you numerology nuts out there that I found really interesting. I came across this article about the number 13 and the Mothman of Point Pleasant case. Take it for what it is. It might just be a coincidence. I don't know. I'm not really a numerology guy, but some consider the Mothman legend to be associated with the number 13. And I'm going to read through some examples here, and then we'll jump right into the timeline of the events leading up to the Mothman sightings, and then the entire flap from 66 to 67, and ultimately the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which pretty much ended the sightings in Point Pleasant. But the number 13 is very interesting here. The original Point Pleasant, West Virginia Mothman reports started in November of 1966 and ended in December of 1967 with the collapse of the Silver Bridge. This makes it a 13-month period of strange events. The Silver Bridge collapsed because of a faulty 13th steel pin eye bar. The name Point Pleasant has 13 letters in it. The most polluted pond in the TNT area, which we'll talk about in just a second, where many of the sightings took place, was Pond 13. The men in black were reported to have been harassing witnesses and telling them not to talk about the Mothman. The phrase itself, men in black, or the men in black, has 13 letters in it. The Mothman Museum that exists in Point Pleasant today has 13 letters in it. The maiden name of Mothman witnesses Linda Scarberry is Linda McDaniel, and that contains 13 letters. Linda Scarberry claimed to have seen the Mothman on her roof when she lived on 13th Street. I can go on and on. This is crazy.
Right.
Several witnesses, their names all have 13 letters. There is a 2017 documentary called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. That was directed by Seth Breedlove, whose name has letters.
How many people's counting the letters in their names right now?
I hope a lot, because I did. There's one more. John Keel, the main investigator of the Mothman in this time frame, he suffered a non-lethal heart attack and was hospitalized on Friday, October 13th, 2006. 13 people died in the Mississippi River Bridge collapse that happened in 2007 after a sighting of the Mothman. And the number 26 is divisible by 13, obviously, by 2. So there are 26 sightings in John Keel's Mothman sightings list printed in his book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space. Mary Heyer, who we'll also talk about in a little while, died on February 15th, 1970, which is 26 months after the Silver Bridge collapse. 3 Mothman sightings are said to have taken place on November 26th, 1966. The witnesses are Ruth Foster in St. Albans, West Virginia, Marvin Schock and Ewing Tilton in Cat Creek, Ohio. Women and 13-year-old child in Charleston, West Virginia. So just some numerology that I found really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Like I said, I don't necessarily know a whole lot about numerology. It's not something that I've ever really studied or...
Kind of a numerology synchronicity type of thing, right?
Absolutely. And those come with periods of high strangeness. So it was worth noting, I thought, and I thought I'd throw it in there as an interesting little tidbit.
It is.
So...
It is.
When we talk about Point Pleasant and we talk about the Mothman Flap, a lot of the sightings came from what they call the TNT area. Now, this is formerly known as the West Virginia Ordnance Works. It's now an overgrown wildlife preserve, and it's about 7 miles north of Point Pleasant. It's also known as the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, and it's a pretty big area of land. It's just over 3,600 acres. And that includes wetlands, farmlands, ponds, brush, and over 1,500 acres of mixed hardwood forest. So it's actually a pretty big wooded area. Now, part of this area was used as a place to manufacture and store ammunition in World War II. Almost 100 large concrete domes, which were often called igloos or bunkers, were built into the ground as like storage. And they were designed that they could be hidden from the air, so trees and grass and things over them. And if you were to fly by around that time, you wouldn't even know that they were there, which is, you know, an effective means of concealment during a pretty hostile time. So, $45 million power plant that was built there to operate this facility. It actually, from 42 to 45, at its peak of operation, employed 3,500 people. So a lot of people had work there. Like I said, many of the Mothman sightings took place either in or around the TNT area, leading people to think that maybe that's where the Mothman lived, or at least hid out, you know. And the abandoned North Power Plant building is actually a location of several reports, including the initial sighting report, which we'll get into in just a minute. It actually has been torn down since then, but the domes and the ponds and everything are still there. You can actually go and visit a lot of the domes are public property. So that's the TNT area. That's the backdrop here of this whole shebang. But before we get to the Mothman, John, we have to go back to 1952. About 2 hours away from Point Pleasant is Flatwoods, West Virginia. At 7:15 p.m., September 12th, 1952, two brothers, Edward and Fred May, and their friend Tommy Heyer, witnessed a bright object across the sky. The object seemed to come to rest on land belonging to a local farmer. Upon witnessing the object, the boys went to the home of the May brothers' mother, Kathleen May, where they reported seeing a UFO crash land in the hills. And from there, Mrs. May was accompanied by the three boys, West Virginia National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, and local children, including Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver. And they traveled to the Fisher farm in an effort to locate whatever it was that they had seen. Now, Lemon's dog is said to have ran ahead out of sight and starts barking, runs back moments later with its tail between its legs, scared, terrified. So the group reaches the top of the hill and they see a large pulsating ball of fire about 50 feet to their right. And they detected this pungent mist, as they described it. It made their eyes and noses burn. And Lemon noticed two small lights over to the left of the object underneath a nearby oak tree. And he shined his flashlight over there and he sees this thing. It is reported to have emitted a shrill hissing noise before gliding towards them, changing direction and then heading off towards the red light. At this point, they all freak out and take off running. So they go back to the house and they call the sheriff, and this co-owner of the local newspaper, Mr. Lee, the Braxton Democrat is the newspaper. So they do some interviews. They return to the site later that night, and they report a sickening burnt metallic odor that is still prevailing. The sheriff and his deputy search the area, find no trace of the encounter other than the smell. But the next morning, Stewart visited the site of the encounter for a second time and discovered two elongated tracks in the mud as well as traces of a thick black liquid. He immediately reported them as being possible signs of a saucer landing, based on the premise that the area had not been subjected to vehicle traffic for more than a year. It was later revealed that the tracks were likely to have been those of a 1942 Chevy pickup truck driven by local Max Lockard, who had gone to the site to look for the creature some hours prior to Stewart's discovery. After the event, Mr. William and Donna Smith, investigators with the civilian saucer investigation, obtained a number of accounts from witnesses who claimed to have experienced a similar or related phenomena. These accounts included the story of a mother and her 21-year-old daughter who claimed to have encountered a creature with the same appearance and odor a week prior to the September 12th incident. The encounter reportedly affected the daughter so badly that she was confined to Clarksburg Hospital for 3 weeks. They also gathered a statement from the mother of Eugene Lemon, in which she said that at the approximate time of the crash, her house had been violently shaken and her radio had cut out for 45 minutes. And a report from the director at the local Board of Education, in which he claimed to have seen a flying saucer taking off at 6:30 a.m. on September 13th, the morning after the creature was sighted. And I want to make a note here to remember her house had been violently shaken and her radio had cut out, because there's another little thing coming up here in a minute that ties into that. Okay. And not directly, but with similar symptoms, you could say. So that's the Flatwoods Monster, and there's a really good documentary about that. It's available on Amazon, I think, from the Small Town Creatures or Small Town Monsters crew. They do a lot of good documentaries. So that's the Flatwoods Monster, 2 hours away, and, a decade before. We'll get to Albert Bender, author of the 1962 nonfiction book Flying Saucers and the Three Men. This is widely recognized as the first major reporting of the Men in Black, and this will tie into the Mothman story directly. Albert Bender is, at the time, one of the most influential ufologists of the 50s and 60s. He served in the Army, Air Forces during World War II. He was obsessed with UFO phenomenon and became a UFO researcher, founding the International Flying Saucers Bureau. And that was in 1952. Although the organization was a success at first, he suddenly shut it down the next year. And later, in March of 53, he had been approached by 3 men in black, he says. And these men visit him in his house, and they communicate with him telepathically. And they give him this metal disc and some instruction, and he reports that he felt like he was being transported. And these men apparently shared insights into the nature of UFOs. And these men shared the origin of UFOs with Bender. And afterwards, he became ill and didn't eat for 3 days. As a result of the visitation, Bender felt encouraged to share what he had seen with other UFO investigators, but no one would have any of it. And then he started suffering frequent headaches after the 3 men visited him, and his coworkers reported that he seemed scared all the time. His alleged experiences were recorded in the book They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, and that is written by Gray Barker. Gray Barker would also be heavily involved in the investigation of Point Pleasant and the Mothman flap, writing the book The Silver Bridge. And also he's known as a little bit of a trickster, John. Mm-hmm. He would set up hired people to mess with other investigators. He would make prank phone calls, send letters, things of that nature.
All right.
But he lived really close by, so he was one of the first investigators actually digging into the Mothman story. Anyway, so he writes this book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And he says that Bender's experience formed the legend of the Men in Black. Bender did not speak of the event for 9 years. And in 1962, Bender wrote Flying Saucers and the 3 Men to tell his own story. In the book, Bender recounts that the Men in Black were from another planet. And Barker published his book, but there is speculation that Bender's experience was only a dream. So you take it for what it's worth, but the descriptions of the Men in Black come back. So who knows? Was it a dream? Or
who's to say that they don't communicate through your dream, you know?
Well, that's a fair guess there too, yeah.
There's a lot of theories on that, so.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a developing theory about alien abduction cases that they might not take place entirely in physical reality, so.
Yes.
Who's to say? So in between the Flatwoods Monster and the Men in Black visiting Bender, and on the other end of the timeline, the Mothman starting up, there's an interesting period of what I would say, from everything I've read, seems to be like a lot of Bigfoot sightings in the area.
Oh.
So this is encompassing like the whole paranormal spectrum here.
Right.
Marlington, West Virginia. It's about 3.5 hours away from Point Pleasant. It's actually, I think, a little southwest of Flatwoods. 1960, there's these reports about hairy human-like beings that would take bites out of apples in the orchards around town. And they became known as apple devils or apple pickers. That's what the locals would call them. And farmers were complaining like these things are tearing down fences, they're breaking branches, the apple trees are, being harvested basically. And people claim to be seeing these dark hairy creatures walking upright with like human dimensions but taller. Mm-hmm. And they were said to be running extremely fast and to have a foul odor. So that makes me think, the Bigfoot thing, because so many reports about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever, is the smell is always a big thing, a really stinky creature. So all this is going on. 4 years later, in Grafton, West Virginia, there's another interesting case that I found. And it's, June 16th of 64. There's this young reporter in his mid-20s. His name's Robert Cockrell. He's driving home from the evening shift at the newspaper he writes for, which is the Grafton Sentinel. He's driving along, and he's following this Tigard River that flows through. And he knew the road pretty good, and he's driving about 50 miles an hour. He rounds this wide curve, and there's a straight section of the road. His headlights catch something strange and out of place. He says that it appeared to be a huge white obstruction on the white side of the road, standing between the road and the riverbank on a cleared-off section of grass. Almost as soon as he saw it, he concluded that it was not an object, but a living beast, the likes of which he had never seen before. It stood 7 to 9 feet tall and was about 4 feet wide. It was stark white with slick, seal-like skin, or a covering that resembled seal skin, and it had no head.
No head?
No head. Now, you also have to remember, he's driving 50 miles an hour. If this thing had some sort of a, really short neck or bulky shoulders or something, maybe a head would have been missed. I don't know. Or it had no head, who's to say. So he gets home, he calms down, and he returns to the scene to investigate. He brings a couple of his buddies with him, and they arrive back at the spot, and the thing was gone. They search up and down the riverbank for more than an hour, find nothing. No tracks, nothing. Although the grass where he said he had seen the creature had been mashed down by something heavy. While they searched, they heard an odd, low whistling sound coming from the direction of the river. The whistling seemed to follow them, but they could not see whatever it was that was making the noise. So, you have Bigfoot, you have the Flatwoods Monster, you've got Men in Black around this time coming into its own little reality.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is taking place in the same area before the Mothman. So, we flash forward 2 more years, March of 1966. Southeast Michigan is experiencing a wave of UFO sightings. Eventually, these sightings would migrate further southeast into Ohio. And by the time of the Mothman encounter later that year, the sightings had been taking place all along the Ohio River, near Point Pleasant itself. And the sightings occurred regularly, almost daily, at 8:30 p.m. In the summer of 1966, a woman in the Ohio Valley, the wife of a doctor, was in her backyard, and she sees this 6-foot-long thing soars past her very rapidly. And she said that it resembled a giant butterfly. And she only talked about this to a few people until later on, when the Mothman had really caught on to the newspapers and all this. So this is summer of 1966.
Mm-hmm.
November of 1966, November 1st, a National Guardsman at the Armory near Camp Conley Road in Point Pleasant saw a large brown humanoid figure perched on the limb of a tree. And he only reported that after the Mothman story came to light. The date is important, though, because November 1st is the day before the Woodrow Derenberger Indrid Cold story. Are you familiar with Woodrow Derenberger and Indrid Cold, John?
No, tell us about it.
I would love to, John. So, this is really good. I'm going to also post the audio interview that Woodrow did with the local television station. I'll post it in the comments of this post on our Facebook page so everybody can listen to the interview. It's really interesting. Then it happened the day after the incident. So Woodrow Derenberger, he's this typical Appalachian man. He sells sewing machines. He lived in Mineral Wells, West Virginia, so not in Point Pleasant, but in the same area. And Wednesday, November 2nd, 1966, about 7:30 at night, he's driving home from work in Marietta, Ohio, and he has a strange experience. And he's driving his red panel truck on Route 77 in Parkersburg, West Virginia, just outside of Parkersburg. And he sees this car coming up behind him relatively fast. So he slows down a little bit and moves over, lets his car get around him. And in his rearview mirror, he sees another light coming, and he assumes it's another car. So he stays at a slower rate, and he sees some sort of flying ship, metallic, cigar-shaped craft, instead of the second vehicle that he was expecting. It pulls up right beside him, goes past him, and stops and hovers ahead of him in the road about 12 inches off the road. So he stops the truck. And he describes the vehicle as resembling a kerosene lamp chimney, if you can kind of put that into your head.
Right.
So it's sitting there hovering on the road. He's stopped, like, what's going on here? And a door opens on this craft. And a being gets out of the ship. The door closes behind him. The vehicle takes off into the air 50 feet or so above the highway. Now, this is a rural area. They've looked into this section of the road. Even now, if it's a nighttime and there's the traffic of 1966, it's going to be dark. If another car were to come, they would not see this craft 50 feet up in the air. There's no way. So it's hidden. I mean, it's sitting there hiding in plain sight. This dude gets out of the ship, and he looks like an ordinary dude off the street. He's about 6 feet tall, looks to be in his mid-30s or so, kind of an olive complexion, dark brown hair. He's got this glossy metallic dark blue coat on. He approaches the truck and telepathically asks Woodrow Derenberger to roll down the window on the passenger's side of his truck. So this guy is standing between the truck and the side of the road. And so he rolls the window down. And he says this guy's mouth did not move. And instead he had a fixed smile on his face. He's looking through the window of the truck without saying anything physically and starts having a conversation with him. And I don't want to tell the whole conversation because the interview does a much better job than I'm going to do, coming from the horse's mouth. So essentially, though, he says, I mean you no harm. He asks him a bunch of questions about the area, about him. Nothing overtly threatening, I suppose. But Derenberger is terrified, right? As you would be. Conversation ends. This guy who introduces himself as Cold. He said that he's called Cold. Cold. He goes back to his ship that has come down. He gets in. Door closes. Ship takes off. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Like I said, he just said some general things and some questions. But one of the things that he said is, we eat, we breathe, we sleep, we bleed, even as you do. And then he ends the conversation with, we will see you again. Now, Derenberger ends up writing a book called Visitors from Lanulos. And it details a relationship that formed between him and this Cold character, who we would later find out his name was Indrid Cold, I-N-D-R-I-D, Cold, the usual way. And then his daughter, Tanya, also wrote a book called Beyond Lanulos, which was several years after the fact. So over the course of the month that follows this, Derenberger claims he's visited by Indrid Cold many times, that he's even taken on a spaceship and flown to Indrid Cold's planet, meets some people that live there. The book is interesting. I have a hard time with some of it, but the initial report, I feel like it seems really genuine just because of the interview, and I think if anybody watches it, they'll agree. Beyond that, I don't know. There's some things that seem a little convenient, so to speak. And his daughter's book, kind of the same way. There's a lot of it there that's really interesting and easily believed, but then there's a few things that kind of stand out, and you're like, well, I don't know, maybe, or maybe not. But
yeah. That's the trouble. That's the trouble with most of them, especially these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You have some people that seem to contradict themselves in the same sentence. But if you consider the fact that maybe this really does happen, and not just this instance, but any contactee instance, I mean, I know personally I'd be kind of in a state of shock, and trying to connect things together. It'd be hard to verbalize probably some of that.
Right. It would. And then if you would, contemplate it for quite a while, and say a long while, and then try to explain it to someone, then you might jump around like you would tell any story,
Sure. And in a period of something that's so, literally out of this world happening to you, I mean, how well is your brain making these memories, and how well is it keeping the weird things that are happening also organized? And I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe someday I'll know. Okay, so that's November 2nd. Mm-hmm. So 10 days later, 1966, November 12th, Kenneth Duncan of Blue Creek and 4 other men were digging a grave for his father-in-law in a cemetery near Clendenin, I think is how it's pronounced, West Virginia. And he claims to see a man-like figure that flew out of the forest nearby and glided over their heads. The men helping him didn't see this thing before it flew away, but Kenneth said that the brown creature lifted off beyond the trees, and it was no bird. It was a humanoid. It was gliding through the trees and was in sight for about a minute. He was baffled, and he said it did not look like any kind of bird, but seemed to be a man with wings. The next day, a contractor, this is one of my favorite stories, and this is going to be the first callback from what I said earlier about the woman's house shaking and the radio freaking out. So, November 13th, the next day. And you pause because a lot of these stories don't end up even coming out until the popular first real big sighting happens. So, you have all this stuff building kind of quietly behind the scenes, like no one's talking about it for fear of, being ridiculed. But this guy, Merle Partridge, like I said, he's a contractor. It's like 10:30 at night. He's watching TV in his house with his wife. And the TV starts going on the fritz. This real fine herringbone pattern shows up on the screen. At the same time, it starts making this high-pitched whining sound, and it just builds up like a generator winding up. And then it explodes across the living room floor.
Oh, not good.
So at the same time, his dog, who's sitting on the porch, starts barking and howling and is looking out into the field. So TV explodes. Guy gets up. It's like, what in the world? Dog's howling. He goes out on the porch. He grabs his .22, and he sees these red lights moving in circular patterns out in the field. His dog, whose name is Bandit, he's a German Shepherd, takes off running towards the field. Doesn't come back. So he's standing there yelling for this dog. Dog never comes back. And he says this dog always listens to him. Really well-trained dog. So he watches these lights for a while, and at first he thinks it's a helicopter, but there's no noise. So it's just these red lights moving around. And eventually they go away. He goes in. He's helping his wife clean up the TV mess, right? Mm-hmm. Next day he goes out to look for the dog. He's walking through the field. And he finds these paw prints. They're rather easy to find because it's a big dog. It's kind of muddy up. But about the spot where the red lights had been, he finds the dog's tracks going around in a circle but not leading off anywhere. And no other tracks of any sort. So he searches for his dog for weeks and never finds the dog. No explanation to this day for exactly what happened to the dog. Weeks after the incident, he'd pretty well given up, and he starts telling his friends, eventually I'm going to find a dead body at this point. And that will be another callback. So you have the radio going on the fritz during a sighting during the Flatwood Monster thing.
Right.
You have this guy's TV blowing up and seeing these red lights, and now his dog has disappeared. A little bit of a similarity there.
Mm-hmm.
So the big one. This is the biggest, the break, really. The breaking point of this Mothman thing happens 2 days later. November 15th. This is the famous story. Two young couples joyriding around in a 57 Chevy. Go to the TNT area. Who knows what they're doing up there. Secluded. You know, probably a little necking. You remember necking, right, John?
Yes, I remember it well, yes.
Yeah, of course. So, one of the couples is Linda and Roger Scarberry. The other was Steve and Mary Millette. They get next to the abandoned power plant and they see these two large red eyes that seem to be reflecting the light from the car headlights. And Steve noticed at first, points it out to everybody. And that's when they are said to have noticed the glowing red eyes belong to a strange creature. A gray man-like figure with wings. Now, this is weird. They said it didn't run from them. It didn't run to them. It wobbled like it couldn't keep its balance. It was having a hard time standing still. They said it had circular, fiery red eyes and a body like a man but with wings. 6 or 7 feet tall with its wings folded against its back like a robin. Kind of like, you know, they kind of taper off in their body. They have the bigger chest and then they kind of,
Yeah.
But they did say that they could see the muscles in its legs, which is, interesting.
That's close too.
Yeah, they couldn't believe what they're seeing, right? They're sitting there. 1 minute, they're doing whatever they're doing. The next minute, here's this thing sitting in front of their car. So they drive off onto the main road, screaming at Roger, like, drive, man, drive, go faster. So they see the creature on the hill by a large billboard as they went around a curve. It spreads its wings and flies straight up into the air. Everybody's terrified. It becomes apparent that this thing is following them now. And it glides back and forth over the car as they're sort of driving down the road. Still, at this point, they have no idea what it is. And they've never been so scared in their life. So they're driving, they're hitting over 100 miles an hour, and it's still keeping up with them. And it's said to have even left some scratch marks on the car. This is fairly unique. There's not very many sightings or reports of it doing any sort of damage or harm in the coming weeks, months, and year. But I believe there's photographs of the scratch marks. So maybe this dude just scratched up his own car. Who knows? I don't believe that. So as they're driving down the road, they come into town. They stop at this ice cream place, Dairyland, decide what they're going to do. Linda says, hey, let's go to the cops. The two guys are like, no, they'll just laugh at us. Let's go back and make sure it's still there. We weren't going crazy. So they're like, all right. So they go and then they end up turning around because they get too scared. Like, okay, we're not going to go back.
Why would you want to go back?
Right. So as they're turning around, they see a large dead dog laying along the road, which was gone when they went by again later on their way back into town. And we kind of wonder now if this dog that they saw was Bandit, the missing dog. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it could have been. Who knows? Right. That guy never was able to, like, there was never a photo or anything like that. And then the body was missing whenever they came back later. So they come back into town again. They go to Tiny's Diner, and they decide to call the cops. They tell their story to the deputy that answers the phone, and he comes down to the diner. He said he didn't believe him at first, but he knew that they weren't troublemakers or anything like that. And he saw that they were genuinely scared. So he goes out to investigate, and they go back out with him. And the cop is shining a spotlight around the area, tree lines, and he starts hearing some strange static on his radio he couldn't explain, and he couldn't find no reason why it was happening. Nor did he find any evidence of the creature. So he's still kind of, well, they saw something, but it's not here, you know. Mm-hmm. So they're sitting on the car as this cop's doing his thing, and they say that they saw shadows circling nearby and a cloud of dust kick up from the coal yard. But they were too scared to check it out, and actually the Mallets after this were too scared to even go back home, so they stayed with the Scarberries. They said they turned all the lights on and stayed awake all night just from fear. So the next day, the sheriff has this press conference to talk about it, because by this time the local press is already printing the story, and they've named the creature the Mothman, kind of a spin-off of Batman, who had just gotten his TV show at the time. And so at the press conference, the cop says, "We understand people are laughing at us, but we couldn't make up all this just to make us look like fools. Like, we know how ridiculous it sounds. We're aware of that, and we're still saying it. Obviously, we're not doing it just to invite criticism. They actually believed it." Right. So this is the first sighting, and this is, midway through November. By the end of the year, John, there are around 25 separate reports that have come in with people seeing this creature. And a lot of these, actually the majority of these reports coming out of Point Pleasant were written by Mary Heyer, who I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And she was a reporter for the Athens Messenger and the manager of their office in Point Pleasant. And during the Mothman sightings, Mary Heyer would often report on the odd occurrences in her newspaper column called Where the Waters Mingle. And you can find that article online, several collected works of it, that you can read these stories as they were happening, basically, on a day-to-day basis. So that leads up to January of 1967. In 2 months, really, you've got over 25 reports of people seeing this thing in this small town. How much of that is mass hysteria, or if you go looking for something, you're going to find it, or is it genuine phenomena? Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean,
but everybody describes the same thing. These red eyes are a recurring theme in all of these reports, and I'm not going to go through all the reports because, one, they're very similar, and two, it's going to take up a lot of time. So I do recommend anybody go out and look for them, though, if you're interested.
Is something like that is, you have one or two people say something, then all of a sudden you have 20 some.
Oh, yeah.
So people, it's pretty easy to make up something like that.
Well,
later, right? I
right.
mean, and that's how some of this disinformation stuff happens.
So to set the scene of this time period, you have got dozens of people in the TNT area every night with guns wanting to, one, if we see this thing, can we shoot it?
Yeah.
And two, if we shoot it, will it die or will it kill us? And the whole town is caught up in this. It's a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think trying to shoot it would be the best idea.
Well, probably not. Probably not.
Be a human-like figure that could fly, faster, at least as fast as 100 mile an hour.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Are you ready for another callback, John?
I'm ready.
Okay, so Mary Heyer, one night in January 1967, she's working at her office late, And an unknown man walks in the door, and she described him as very, very short, like 4.5 feet tall. And he had strange, dark, deep-set eyes, and he wore these really thick glasses. And he's wearing these shoes that have really thick soles that probably added an inch or two to his height, she says. He had long black hair, cut squarely like a bowl cut, and he spoke in a peculiar, low, halted voice. And he comes in, and he's asking her some questions about UFO sightings in the area. And he sees her with this, ballpoint pen in her hand, and she's obviously working, she's writing. And he asks if he can see the pen, and she thinks he's gonna, make a note or something, and he's fascinated with this pen like he's never seen a pen in his life. Mm-hmm. He starts laughing like crazily, and he just walks out with the pen. Like, just leaves the office, steals the pen. Okay, so call back to Men in Black. Because later on, through John Keel and Gray Barker and Mary Hyre and their investigative work, they kind of decide that this guy might have been related to the Men in Black. This is the first time that an odd duck shows up in town. Mm-hmm. This is West Virginia, rural West Virginia, 1967. It wasn't exactly a tourist spot, even with everything that was going on. This weird dude just shows up and starts asking these UFO questions, and then is fascinated by this ink pen like he's never seen one in his life. It's kind of weird.
Right.
The Men in Black encounters don't stop there, though, John, let me tell you. Mm-hmm. February 22nd at 8:15 a.m., there's a Mothman witness named Connie Carpenter. She's walking to school. This black 1949 Buick pulls up beside her. The driver opens his door, asks for directions somewhere, and she said that he seemed to be a clean-cut young man, about 25 or so, with thick, neatly combed black hair and a deep suntan. When she gets closer to the car, he orders her to get in and grabs her by the arms, trying to pull her into the car. She manages to get away, tears the sleeve of her shirt in the process, runs back to her house, locks the door. The next day, a threatening note was slipped under her door reading, "Be careful, girl, I can get you yet." May 5th of 1967, Mary Hyre sees the same odd guy who comes into her office and steals the pen back in January. This time she sees him on the streets of Point Pleasant, and he's wearing a khaki-colored uniform type of clothing, but he still had the thick-soled shoes on. And whenever he sees her, he takes off running again. He runs towards this large black car that suddenly came driving around the corner, climbs in, and the vehicle takes off. 3 days later, May 8th, 1967, about 11:30 at night, Mary Hyre is arriving home from a meeting. And just as she is on her porch opening the door, a black car stops outside of her house. A man gets out, snaps a picture with a really bright flash, then drives off while she's disoriented from the flash. These Men in Black sightings were almost more terrifying for these people than the Mothman itself. You have these strange guys showing up, asking weird questions, taking pictures of people, stealing ink pens. And they're all weird people, like physically different. The mannerisms are different. Like they're not of this world.
Organic, I guess.
Sure. Mothman sightings continue to happen. UFO sightings continue to happen. Men in Black sightings continue to happen. If you believe Woodrow Derenberger's story from his book, he's still in communication with Indrid Cold this whole time until the Silver Bridge collapses. The main street in Point Pleasant leads straight to an I-bar chain style suspension bridge called the Silver Bridge. They call it that because it's painted in an aluminum paint. It goes across the Ohio River, and It goes to a town called Gallipolis or Gallipolis, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And it's like a sister town, you know. They're both river towns right next to each other. People go across this bridge multiple times a day. This is December 15th, 1967, exactly 13 months after the first Mothman sightings. Bridge is full of cars, people going Christmas shopping, back and forth. Suddenly the bridge begins to shake, and there's a low moaning of metal, a loud screech, and the bridge collapses into the river. Lots of people missing, lots of people dead. In a small town, it's something that's hard to get over.
Right.
Now, just a month or so before this, Mary Heyer tells John Keel she's had this terrible nightmare. This is in a letter that's also available online. You can find all the letters from her to John Keel, who I believe was in New York at the time. He would come to Point Pleasant several times from 1966 to 1967, doing his investigations and writings. She writes a letter. She has this terrible nightmare that people were drowning in the river. There were Christmas packages floating in the water. And she said it felt like something awful was going to happen. And he comes back to Point Pleasant around Thanksgiving that year. And in his notes, people in the area were all having dreams and nightmares about some sort of a disaster. And one of them was Virginia Thomas, and she said that she'd been having dreams and nightmares about people dying in the water. So the bridge collapses. 46 people died, 9 injured, 2 people never found, making it the worst bridge accident in American history at the time. And there were rescue workers for days pulling smashed cars and bodies from the river. And the actual collapse happened on the coldest day of the year that year. So cold water, you wouldn't have much time.
No.
So really, I mean, it ends in a tragedy because this bridge collapses. And all the sightings leading up to this kind of stop. It's like, it was all building towards this is what it makes it seem like, you know. A couple people said that they saw the Mothman near the bridge before the incident, but it could just be people being people. Rumors were spreading around that it was the bridge collapse was directly connected to the Mothman in some way, and maybe that his appearance could have been a warning or a dark premonition of things to come.
You think it could be like a distraction from the Mothman? That's cruel.
That's an interesting theory.
You know, I mean, you've got all this going on. How are we going to stop this? You know, right? And very crude way, it did stop it.
Sure. I mean, like any of it's speculation, but
you know, why would a winged creature doing all this for all this time all of a sudden decide to do that? That's what I would think. That to me that wouldn't make any sense.
No, absolutely not. Especially when there are no reports of people being physically harmed.
Right. Just a theory.
No, I mean I don't prescribe to the theory that the Mothman pulled a pin on a bridge so it would collapse or anything like that, but I don't know.
Pretty strange.
I like your theory. I like your theory of it being a distraction.
Well, distractions is a theory in itself, I guess you could say.
Sure.
A lot of different things, but there's known distractions for different events in history.
Oh, yeah.
There's some that say, well, that maybe, you know, you'd have to think about it a little bit. You say, that would be a distraction. I mean, to me, you have all this going on. Mm-hmm. I don't know very much about the Mothman, actually, except what I'm holding in my hand right now.
Oh.
Anyway, you know, you have all this going on, and it seems to me like then it just ends with that tragic accident. I wouldn't, you know, that's the timing of that is crazy. you know, during that time of the year.
Yeah.
And with all of that was going on and everything that was stirring, the Men in Black and all of this going on, and it's getting to be, a quote, hot place, right? And maybe too hot.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I guess I always came from the perspective of, there's all this, this weird stuff going on. It's become a part of everybody's life for this past year. And then there's something, a real tragedy happens, and maybe people are just kind of done with it. I don't feel like going and looking for some giant creature out in the woods anymore. I'm kind of just bummed.
Yeah, I got enough going on. Right.
But
right.
If it was a distraction, then it would serve its purpose and keep people away from it, I suppose.
That's something I'm personally kind of looking into is distractions, or because if you really pay close attention to a lot of things that go on, usually there's something else that may or may not have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, then the focus is there.
Sure.
Sort of like a sleight of hand, Hey, look at this, Oh, now look at this. Oh, you didn't see this happen because this is going on. I do think that goes on quite a bit, actually.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just a personal theory.
No, not too personal, because it's easily buy-inable. I buy into that.
Right.
I just made up buy-inable as a word, so I think I deserve some sort of an award.
I think you should. I'm writing it down right now.
Yes. That's terrific. So, Silver Bridge collapses. Everybody stops looking. No more reports. No more sightings. Everything dies down until you have information of things that have happened since then.
Okay. Well, I've got 3 things here. And
lay it on.
These are really, really interesting. I think you're going to get kind of wound up about this because it's pretty recent, and it's within our area. And I don't really know which one I want to begin with here because there's so much that ties into what you have just talked about. So I'm just going to begin with the first. So this is from the DePaula real newspaper, okay? I'm real big on real stuff like that.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to be skipping around here a little bit. Since 2017, Chicago residents in both the city and suburbs have reported seeing a large winged creature in the city's skyline. So this since 2017.
Okay.
Multiple witnesses describe the creature as being taller than a human, with glowing eyes and bat-like wings.
Wow.
So here we go.
Here we go.
Yeah. Many have dubbed the mystery creature the Chicago Mothman. Have you ever heard of the Chicago Mothman?
Yeah, I've heard rumblings, but again, it's not something I've really researched because I've always focused on, the event in the 60s, but I would love to research it with you right now.
Yes, this gets very interesting. Okay. This recent sighting came in November 2019, when a truck driver claimed to have seen the mysterious creature while on the job picking up a shipment at O'Hare.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's quite a place there.
It is.
For something like this to happen. The witness said he was having a cigarette as the truck was being loaded when he spotted something like a large bird standing by the parking lot fence. He said in a statement it looked like a person with wings that were stretched out and flapping. So this is not from a book. This is from the DePaula. It's a newspaper from Northern Illinois.
Okay.
So skip here. Reports like this have been numerous in the past 3 years. In Chicago, there were 55 sightings.
Wow.
Okay, of a similar winged being in 2017 alone.
Wow.
So this is in 1 year, 55 sightings. In January 2018 article, Vice interviewed an employee of Logan Square Bar, the Owl, who says he spotted the Mothman gliding above the Northwest Side neighborhood one night while working. Bouncer John, not going to try his last name.
Bouncer John.
You wouldn't either. Told Vice it didn't look like a bat so much. It looked like a human with feathers and fur. And it flew, but it didn't fly like anything he'd ever seen. Well, whatever he means by that. I don't know. Something that flies something like you've never seen.
Okay.
Sightings like this aren't new to Illinois. So I'm going back some years now. July 25th, 1977, a Logan County resident claimed that while watching her children play in the backyard one evening, 2 giant bird-like creatures attacked her family.
Ooh.
One of these giant birds, the resident claimed, snatched up her son and carried him several yards before dropping the child. Pretty creepy there. And again, this is from a newspaper, okay? This is not from a book. This is a newspaper is reporting this, and they have talked to the people.
Now, they explicitly said large birds.
Yeah, 2.
Okay,
Picked up a child and then dropped. So, yeah. It doesn't say how old the child was.
Yeah, sure, it'd make a big difference. But during the Point Pleasant case, of course, you've got several, scientists coming in to debunk the situation. And the first solution that they came up with was that it was a sandhill crane that people were seeing. Now, sandhill cranes can get pretty big.
They can,
but do not match the physical descriptions of these reports at all. So the locals, they laughed that one off. It's not a sandhill crane.
I'm laughing that one off.
Sure, absolutely. So then
I like to see a crane pick up a child. I mean, yeah.
Oh, sure. the next solution that these scientists come up with is that, I don't remember the exact date, but sometime in 67, I'm wanting to say in the spring, there's this giant owl in this barn that this farmer finds, and they shoot it, and they say, well, this is what everybody's been seeing, this big owl. So for now, in present time, for the newspaper to say that there's these 2 large birds, similarities there.
Yeah. Are you ready for another one?
John, I was born ready for another one.
Yeah. This is from Journal and Topics out of Rosemont, Illinois. And this is from October 11th, 2019 is when this was reported on. Okay.
Really recently.
Yeah. UFO Clearinghouse, a humanoid figure similar in appearance to the fabled Mothman was sighted in the village of Rosemont October 5th and reappeared on following Monday, I guess. Person who submitted the report claimed he or she was sitting in their rideshare vehicle near Toll Booth Plaza 31 near O'Hare. So we're getting detailed here. The report said they were filling around their car where they noticed a 6 to 7 foot creature appear out of the trees. The creature was described as hunched over, walking with a waddle, black, and 2 bright red eyes.
Wow.
Okay, so are you with me here? This is last year in Illinois. Okay. According to report, the creature opened its large wings, flapped south toward the baseball park. It disappeared in a few seconds. Some dude's name. And Lon Strickler said the only information available in the eyewitness account, he told the Journal his team is attempting to track down the witness for more information. Then it goes on to explain what you explained about the history of Mothman. Locally, sightings of winged humanoid creatures have sprung up around Chicagoland in the last several years. Plaza 31 is on the ramp from I-90 to westbound I-90 in Rosemont, just outside of O'Hare. Okay?
All right. Now, I'm going to pause you for a second.
Okay.
Lon Strickler, he runs the Phantoms and Monsters website, right?
I don't know.
Hold on. We're doing on the spot research here.
Okay.
I'll edit some of this out, but I have to know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yep. He does.
Okay.
He runs phantomandmonsters.com, paranormal blog since 2005.
There you go.
Yes, sir. Okay. Anyway, as you were.
Getting interesting. I get one more. This one is my personal favorite for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
Okay, more Great Lakes Mothman sightings, and this time in Indiana. This one's very interesting, I think. 2017 to 2019 produced more Mothman-type sightings than any time since the infamous Mothman incident in West Virginia. Sightings began around Lake Michigan shoreline around Chicago. The latest area a wingman creature was sighted is on a beeline between Lake Michigan and the Ohio River Valley in east central Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, getting close. All right. The sighting occurred just after Christmas 2018 near Muncie and came to light in January 2019. So here's the bit of the story. The witness is a military veteran, hunter, trapper, and farmer who lives in the immediate area. Let me skip around here. His knowledge of military flying craft, wildlife, and his keen sense of observance was apparent while I talked to him. The wing beam that he was observing was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The creature was flying just above treetop level and was easily visible to the witness. His reaction was to slam on his brakes in wonderment, exclaiming to his wife, "Did you see that?" His wife was shaken by the sudden stop and was unable to react fast enough to see the wing beam. Okay, so the Lake Michigan area Mothman sightings put the Chicagoland area on edge during 2017 with a hot spot around Calumet Park, which that's close to the border of Indiana and Illinois.
Uh-huh. I've been there.
Yeah, I have tried a long time ago. I've been there. And then it goes on to explain a little bit of history. Now, here's something. Now, this gets really interesting, I think.
All right.
It shows a map here where they were spotted around Muncie. And they're calling this one the Muncie Mothman. That must be a thing. Wherever you see the Mothman, you name it after your town.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
You're right. Anyway, it says, while it's not likely that a Mothman could be following roads, it's worth noting that US 35 connects Lake Michigan at Michigan City, Indiana, through Muncie to Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Oh, man.
It's US 35 that runs over the Silver Bridge.
Well, what would have been the Silver Bridge?
Right.
It's whatever the bridge is now.
Right. Right.
Wow.
So I throw it to you.
Well, man, no, that's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Like this is in the past, 2-3 years that I'm talking about here.
Yeah, well, okay. So, obviously, for those of us in this area of interest, we at least know of the Mothman.
Mm-hmm.
In general, a lot of people probably couldn't tell you where the stories took place back in the 60s. They couldn't tell you anything about the sightings, the location, the people involved. But for people to be seeing the Mothman in present time, literally up the road.
Months ago.
That it's one thing to make up a story and say, oh, I saw the Mothman. But you'd have to be in the small percentage of Fordians, you know, like you and I to know, to make that connection, to set your story on that road.
Yeah, and what got me a couple of things was this is all around O'Hare.
Yeah.
Two of them. And generally around a larger area.
Mm-hmm.
But the Highway 35 thing, you know, I think we all took that in a little bit. Right?
Without going off on too much of a tangent, but I feel obligated. O'Hare, obviously, you know, for people of our persuasion, you've probably heard of the activity.
Mm-hmm.
And its close proximity to Lake Michigan, which is a very large body of water.
Right.
With an air of mystery about it in its own.
Oh, a lot of mysteries, yeah.
If you prescribe to the theory of unidentified submersible craft.
That's what I was thinking about.
And a connection to the Mothman.
Hmm?
Why not? It's not hard to jump off of that conclusion to say, well, it's perfectly logical.
Yeah. You're talking rivers and lakes and right.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. You know, the highway thing is really interesting. I mean, to me, that's just like, okay. So you can literally drive on that highway and just basically go through a history of Mothman.
Right. Yeah, that's intense. You were right. That is really interesting.
It's you know, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, okay, this is getting a little close here now.
Okay, so Lake Michigan, you know, the Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to do my geography in my head here. It'd be the western part of Lake Erie would open up to, would that be the Mississippi, which would flow to the Ohio, which flows right on Point Pleasant, West Virginia as well.
Yeah, you've got a lot of connections there. I mean, you know, it's kind of, that's almost a podcast or stuff goes, you know, Ohio, Mississippi, even the Gulf. I mean, you know, yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of sitting here flabbergasted right now.
And you know, fairly deep bodies of water.
Yeah.
Definitely like Michigan, right? I mean, even the Ohio, you know, in places are pretty deep.
Sure.
So
are these the most recent that you found, or are these just recent ones that you picked?
I went through for recent, and it kind of blew my mind because when I went to recent, they were all very close to us.
Yeah.
You know, then I thought, okay, I'm done for now. But yeah,
before you picked up from your backyard.
Those are very recent, and I haven't. You know, I wanted to get a little bit more searching, scoping out about O'Hare, Chicago, because there has to be a lot.
Absolutely.
You know, there has to be a lot. So, especially when you have at least two of the stories came from legitimate newspaper articles.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I don't know. To me, I was just kind of laughing listening to you talk about the history and going through the years, and you was talking about Point Pleasant and the bridge, and I had already looked at these stories, obviously, and I'm just laughing to myself, thinking, I might be blowing your mind tonight.
I invite you to do that at any point in time that you choose, especially to do with the Mothman, because for whatever reason, you know, I'm like 13, 14 years old, I hear about the Mothman, and like, that's really was my driving, like, force into the paranormal. Yeah, my grandma, whenever I was younger, we would always talk about UFOs and sometimes ghosts and, things like that. She was, a big believer in alien life outside of our planet. So not as much into some of the other paranormal stuff, but I think she had a realistic approach to, we can't be the only life that exists in the entire universe.
Right.
So, from a young age, I was always talking about, the extraterrestrial side. But whenever I found out about the Mothman, that was, and everybody as a kid and an early teen, trying to scare each other or whatever with ghost stories and things like that. But the Mothman was really what drove me into researching. I picked a good one, I guess. For whatever reason, it, inspired me to dig in, but there's a lot of stuff to find. Like, from what I've mentioned, it's not even, the half of the story of things that were going on there. I had to cherry pick a little bit, just for the time of the podcast, because I don't want to have a 5-hour long podcast about 1966 West Virginia. And there's a lot of things that I'd like to go back to. In future episodes. John Keel would be a good episode. Even Woodrow Derenberger's book would be a good topic of discussion in the future. Things that I left out specifically, just to give a general timeline of the events. And then the stuff that you're finding now, I mean.
Yeah. No, that's more my thing. I try to keep up on more recent, which is really hard because, it doesn't take too long to figure out that it's kind of BS.
Sure.
But I generally go by newspaper articles and kind of start there.
Yeah.
I interview a couple of people. They're going to say, okay, seen this here, blah, blah, blah. So, that tells me that the event, something happened. Instead of someone totally making everything up, something happened. So that's where I like to start with things like that. And I didn't even throw in the Wabash River. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah.
In your research, the Lawton, he does a very good job with his stories. So who knows, you might find that he has, especially if he was personally investigating something. So
yeah, there you go. Whew. Everybody sleep well. Mothman's hundreds of miles.
Well, I'm still not convinced that the Mothman would be something to immediately fear.
No.
Could he be a harbinger of doom? Maybe, but is he a physical threat in the present time? Probably not.
No.
But there's a whole other theory on the Mothman, John, and I don't want to get into that tonight, but definitely in a part 2 in the future. Another interesting theory on the Mothman and his existence and purpose that we will get into at another time.
Sounds good.
I can't wait.
Yes, me either.
So, in keeping with our tradition from the first episode, on a scale of 0 to 100, how probable in your mind and a percentage is the existence of the Mothman?
Well, like where I come from, reading a couple of newspaper articles, especially recent ones, I would say, as far as being something that people have witnessed and very similar, there's a little bit of differences, but there's a lot of odd similarities, especially with the wobble.
Mm-hmm.
I would say between 1 and 100, I'm going with about an 85.
Those are rookie numbers, John. I'm all in. I'm all in on the Mothman.
Are you?
I'm all
I mean,
in.
it's hard to say. I mean, do I think that there is a Mothman? Trying to explain myself here. Or is it something that is described as a Mothman, and that is something from, another planet? Is it something that's from our planet, under the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I would go higher to say that it's something that resides on our planet, that could be from another planet, but that resides at our planet, that I'm really beginning to think maybe prefers or lives underwater.
That's an interesting take, because I've never even.
I'm real picky on stuff like this. I don't like to come out and say, yeah, I think there is a Mothman, period, because I think that's too general. I mean, is it more of an insect, or is it more of a human, or is it something half and half, or is it something that is it so, because if the way I would think of some alien technology, maybe that we don't even understand it. That it's so advanced that we see it as one thing, and other people say, well, this thing had wings and flew. Especially like that one article said, flew like nothing I've ever seen fly before. I don't know where that's coming from. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. So that makes me wonder how, did it fly or did it float? Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Is it actual wings, or is it used for something else? I mean, you can look at an airplane, and I could tell you, if I didn't know what an airplane was, I could say the other day, Jason, I looked up in the sky and there was this white streak, and then I seen this giant silver bird, and it didn't have any eyes at all, and it was a small silver bird that was flying pretty fast, but it left this big white streak. See what I'm getting at? Yep.
And I would respond with, well, those are obviously chemtrails, John.
Yeah, but if you see something like the Mothman, we don't know. No one really knows.
No, what absolutely not.
It really is. To me, that's where it gets really interesting. I mean, what is it? What are you actually, are you seeing red eyes, or are you seeing something inside, maybe some type of a suit that's designed for flight and underwater, and maybe the wings are part of that suit, and there's another being inside that suit, and the red eyes is nothing more than just some type of a shield to protect it from our atmosphere. I'm getting out there, but I'm just,
You have laid on multiple theories I have never considered.
That's part of what I'm here for.
Until this point, I was fairly convinced this could maybe potentially be some sort of a dimensional slip, where something from another frequency had come into our own, or potentially extraterrestrial. And now I'm wondering if it's an extraterrestrial in a water suit that follows the highway through Ohio and Indiana and Illinois to the O'Hare Airport, where it catches a ride on the nearest UFO to become a USO and flow right back down the river from whence it came. I have went on quite a journey in these last 30 minutes.
Yes. But I don't know, there's a lot, that's just the way I approach everything, I think, okay, and I'm with you on the dimensional thing, because it's a thing of things are so far away. If you take something that's 175 light years away, even if you have something that can travel the speed of light, it'll take you a while.
Right.
So, maybe you're getting into dimensional sort of an instantaneous dimensional travel type of thing.
A topic for another day.
I'm not feeling that with the Mothman. I'm not. I'm feeling an underwater thing here. I really am.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna look into that.
You can do that.
For my own personal information and my own research, I'm looking into that because it's an avenue that not only did I never consider, I never even thought of existing. And that's why I count on you, John.
I'm just here, you know.
You're just a man.
I'm just a man.
All right. I do think that's been a lot of information here to digest. This is a multi-listener right here. You got to listen to this one more than once, I think.
Yes.
And I would like for anybody that's listening right now to feel free to throw out your ideas too, because apparently I am willing to accept alternate theories on the existence of the Mothman, turns out. No. Because now I don't know. Mm-hmm. You literally blew my mind.
Either that or the Mothman likes just to hang around water for some reason.
Well, you got to drink. Man's got to drink.
That's right.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much. Another great episode in the can.
You're very welcome.
And we will see everybody next time. I've been Jason.
And I'm John.
Thanks for tuning in.
Until next time, keep the fire going.